Hello and welcome back to Guzzling Garage. This is going to be part 2 of the supercharger job on the Jaguar F Type. As you can see, we've got the supercharger out. We're currently halfway through rebuilding it, and you might remember in the last episode we had some tidying up to do in the engine bay. So we had loads of nuts and seeds from some sort of rodent visitor. They're all gone, cleaned up, hoovered those away. And we've also taken the liberty of re-drilling some of these snapped bolts, and I had some problematic bolts on the rocker cover as well. Those have all been re-drilled, re-tapped and replaced with new Jaguar items. That was these three here, and the same for the other side of the engine. So in this episode we'll carry on. We've got some plastic water pipes to change. I've got a new water pump to chuck in. There's a little coupling that goes between the water pump and the oil cooler. And I've got a whole box of other bits as well. Again, we'll see how far we get. I'll try and keep it under the hour mark. There's quite a lot to get through. Let's crack on. Okay, so that's all looking a lot better. There was a really surprisingly deep layer of those little seeds or nuts, whatever they were. What I am a little bit concerned about is the state of these rocker cover bolts. So looking a bit closer at them, you can see they've totally rotted off. There's no heads left on them, and they should look like that. So while we're here, I think it'd make sense to do something about them, because they're only going to rot more and eventually let go, and we'll probably end up with an oil leak. In fact, it sort of looks to me like there might already be a bit of a, not a proper leak, but a bit of weepage or seepage coming out of that joint already. And now it's all clean again. We'll just re-rag all the ports. So in the big box then, we've got a load of goodies from Britcar Global mostly, although not exclusively. Inlet manifold gasket in there, and in this much bigger box is the other inlet manifold gasket. Keep those flat, keep them safe. In here is a genuine water pump. So water pump is obviously a wear and tear item on most cars. It's external on the F Type. A lot of the times these days it's built into the timing belt kind of assembly. But we can change it while we're here. Gives us a bit of peace of mind and saves us a job if we have to come back to all this lot. Worth noting on this is on the top of the water pump here, there's this little brass elbow, brass union type fitting, and there should be a plastic little pipe that goes in here that comes off the thermostat housing. As you know, we don't like plastic elbows on things, so trying to do a brass elbow version now instead, which I think suits it a lot better, so we'll be using that. I'll try and get you the part number on that because it's not exactly clear, but you can get those separately, nice and cheap. What else have we got? So we've got a metal version of the coolant crossover pipe for the rear of the engine. It's come with a little sensor and all that sort of stuff with it as well. It's come with the O-rings to seal it on either end as well, which is a nice touch. Now this is aluminium and it is very cheap and Chinese. The metal quality actually feels fine, and so does the appearance of the casting and everything, but it was a very suspiciously cheap item. It's held together with some sort of sealant there, look. So I am going to check the torque on all these screws just to be sure before I put it in, because these are meant to be, I don't know, a couple of £100 I think, but I picked this up for something crazy like £38 off of a very dodgy looking website which has got hit and miss reviews, but it seems to have worked out okay for me so far. Similarly, off the same site, the site was called Frugo. I've got this aluminium thermostat housing complete with a new thermostat inside it, and again these on the originals are plastic and like to shatter at random and just explode, and I think they leak on the joints and stuff as well. So to get those two items in aluminium, again you're looking at hundreds of pounds from a reputable supplier. From this dodgy cheap Chinese site, I've got them for something like 60 quid for the pair, I think. So I'll let you know about that. This is the little plastic coupler that goes between the oil cooler and the water pump. Obviously this one is in aluminium. This is the thermostat pipe assembly itself. This is the plastic elbow I was talking about. Up here on this corner, if you can see that in there is plastic, so that's what the brass replacement is for. That's a new throttle body gasket. I don't think I really needed that, to be honest. I might sell this or try and reuse the original or whatever, but yeah, the original is very, very good quality. I don't think you need a new one of these. These pipes like to shatter again because they've got plastic couplings on all the ends and things, particularly around here where they're quite a brittle plastic line, so good to have some new ones of them. And finally, one of the main reasons we're here is these aluminium Y-pipes. So these are the proper Land Rover Jaguar ones. So they'll really look the part in the engine bay, won't they? And that's it. So we've got a bit to be on with, and I'm not sure where I'm going to go first, but let's just get started. So most of our box of goodies fits around this area. We've got the water pump here. The thermostat is tucked around just underneath this air pipe in this area. Got the little plastic coupler that's going straight up and down there. There's the upper YPipe here. That's the piece that goes into the oil cooler, which is just below the V there. That's where our little brass elbow sits on the water pump. So the first thing I think I need to do is get the belt off. Very similar process to removing the supercharger belt. We've got to move that tensioner there by means of a 3/8 drive extension. Move that tensioner over and we should be able to slip the belt off. I'm going to try and slip the belt off over the top of the pulley, but if I get enough room to do that, we'll find out. Something else I've done just before we try and remove that is I've drawn a diagram of the belt. There's probably a better one available online, but this is just for my reference. So I've got the water pump at the top, then it goes down to this pulley. I'm not sure what that does, or that one. I think those are either going to be vacuum pumps or power steering, but it's kind of irrelevant to me at this time. Goes around the aircon, wraps right round the crankshaft because that's where all the drive is coming from. Then that's the tensioner, which again it wraps right round as an idler, and then over to this second pulley and back up to the water pump. That's more to aid me on refitting to ensure that I've got the right route on the belt. So yeah, let's crack on. It's two T30 screws to hold down the top Y-pipe. Something I should mention at this point is that I used a vacuum on that top port, the wet vac, just to take any coolant out of the engine so that I wasn't spilling it everywhere when I removed it. So I think next I'm going to work towards the water pump. So we've obviously got the big hose to take off this end, the little elbow in there, and then the securing bolts. So it looks like there's two this side and two this side on the water pump as well. So 4 securing bolts, and these ones on the back can be left alone because that's how the new pump comes. To help me get to the coolant pipe on that end of things over there, I'm probably going to move the air intake pipe out of the way because that's also obscuring the thermostat housing, which we need to get to as well. So to get the air intake pipe out, it's a little 7mm Jubilee style clip, but you have to get right down into this little crevice down here. once you've got the 7mm Jubilee loose, there's the crankcase breather type pipe there to disconnect. Again, just squeeze on them clips. That pulls straight off. And then hidden at the back here, there's a little 10mm with a rubber mounting bush on it. And there we are. So now with the intake pipe out of the way, we'll have a go at attacking the cooling hoses here and here. This one's obviously on this little plastic elbow, which may well snap, but we'll give it a go anyway, and then we'll see what's next. So although we've got the hose clip moved out of the way, it's just been a bit stubborn on the rubber hose. So I've got a hook pick. Just going to wedge that in, but try not to pierce the hose because it's quite delicate. And then at the same time, a bit of WD-40 should help lubricate the rubber and help it slide off and out of the way. So as usual, I'm struggling a little bit. That's really stubborn, can't get it off very easily, so I was thinking I could maybe take the water pump and the thermostat off as one assembly and then split that hose when it's on the bench or something like that. We'll see how we get on with that. To get the water pump off, there's the 4 screws that we mentioned earlier, T30 size, but also this tensioner is in the way, the belt tensioner. That's a 15mm nut that holds it on, so I'm going to try and take that off. Now sometimes with those belt tensioners there's often like a locking pin that you're supposed to put in to hold the tension on it for either reassembly or removal. I've had a little look around and I can't really see anywhere you would easily put a locking pin in, so I'm just going to go for it without and see what happens. I can't really feel any tension on it, so fingers crossed we should be fairly safe. But whenever you're dealing with a sprung-loaded tensioner, it's a good idea to keep your wits about you, just in case the spring does let go and you end up with the tensioner pinning your fingers onto something or taking the tool out of your hands, because the springs can be quite powerful. Yeah, that one's quite a simple one. Look, there's no locking pin or device or anything, no tricks on the go there. Bearing's in pretty good nick as well. So we'll take that out and put that to one side. And then, as I say, the 4 water pump screws are all T30 size. So I've got a 3/8 ratchet, little stubby extension, and a T30. So with those 4 bolts out, there's a couple of little moulded lips in the casing for the water pump that look like they're designed for pry bars. There we go, that's that hose off. That was a lot easier. So those are the locations for the 4 bolts for the water pump. 1, 2, 3, 4. That bolt hole was for the tensioner, which was in the way of this lower bolt hole. That's the really stubborn hose that I was struggling to get off. And then this is the plastic adapter that goes from the water pump into the oil cooler there at the back. So we got that to change, new water pump to fit, and the top YPipe to put back on. But also down to this side is this big plastic body, which is the thermostat housing. This seems like it could be just as much of a pain for getting these hoses off at the bottom end. So we're going to pay a bit of attention to that. I think while we've got a bit of extra space, it might just help us out. So we'll try and take this hose clip off the bottom hose here, and there's some sort of arrangement going on here. I think there's, if you've ever seen one, it has like a little wire clip that you pull out to like disengage the lock mechanism, and then you can pull that bottom tube off, I think. So let's have a go at that one. And we'll show you the new thermostat, just because it's a bit easier than trying to poke the camera down the engine bay. Over here we've got the mounting bracket, which is only one little plastic tab there. We've got a hole for a wiring clip. There's another hole for a wiring clip just here. And then back round this side there's another hole for a wiring clip. Plus there's the lower hose and that hose as well. In the engine bay it's on that sort of orientation. So these 2 upper hoses we don't need to worry about, because that's these 2, and obviously we've disconnected the other end of those already. It's these 2 lower hoses, 3 wiring clips, and a mounting bracket that we've got to contend with. This groove on the bottom, if you can see, that's the lock mechanism I was talking about for that lower hose. So there's a wire clip that slides in and engages with that groove to keep the bottom hose physically attached. So we've got to pull out a clip, and then we should be able to remove that, and that's just a standard squeezy hose clamp. So that was the location of one of the plastic wiring plugs. That one in there was just a plastic push clip. The 2 plastic hoses here, if I move that you can see that mounting plug which went in that hole just there, that plug to that hole. And then that just leaves the 3rd little wiring clip round here to contend with, which is a bit tight. So we'll put you on the camera tripod, and then we've got to play with those bottom hoses. In theory then, that should be this thermostat assembly with its top 2 hoses free to come out, because we've taken out the mounting bracket screw that's just down that end. And if you can see this black wire clip, this pushes in and pulls out of that assembly. So it's normally seated like that, and if you get a little hook, you can hook it in there and pull the clip out to that position. Now I don't know if it needs to come fully out, they don't usually, so a bit of a fight now to wiggle that out, but bear in mind that the bottom piece is plastic as well as the top piece, so we don't want to damage the bottom piece, crack it, or give it any too much stress or anything. So the trick there with that bit was lots of wiggling. You'll never get that with brute force. You just got to keep wiggling it back and forth. Next then, for the F-Type, I want to pay some attention to this little guy before we forget him. So this just should pull off. Might need to rotate it a little bit, because that sort of keyway cutout shape, I think, sort of locks it in position behind this dip in the block. Yeah, it just pulls off fairly straightforwardly. There is a rubber seal that's left behind on that pipe, which is just like a little plastic mounting flange to keep that rubber seal located, I think. So the actual pipe that feeds into the oil cooler is metal, but just this little flexible bit here is just a plastic lug, I think, just to keep that seal located in the correct place. So I'm not worried about that. So just give that seal a wipe. Make sure there's no dust or other contamination on it. We have made a lot of mess around here lately. And then we've got the new one to fit. Again, paying attention to that seal because that's going to sit inside the back of the water pump. And then rotate that right round until it sits where we want it. Then I'm going to have a look at putting the thermostat and the water pump together, probably over on the bench because I had so much trouble with those tight hose clips. So at the bench then, and just to save us from messing around in the engine bay so much, we're going to take the hoses off and put them onto our new aluminium thermostat body. Paying attention to the thermostat body closely then, you can see that there's a moulded arrow on the thermostat here, which matches up with this paint line on the hose to show where it should be aligned to. Same for this side, there's a moulded line there if you can see that. And that should line up roughly with that paint line there as well. So I need to save this hose, but I have got a brand new version of this. So let's try and get this one off nicely. Next to have a look at is the water pump. So you'll remember this is the old one that we removed. In there is a seal which has stayed on in the pump from the plastic distance piece that sits at the back to the oil cooler, and it's retained the little plastic elbow that again is a fairly common weak point that does like to snap. So that's all well and good. We're going to check the new pump and we're going to see that we've got 2 new gaskets with it. The bolts are already in there as well. There's no seal in here because we've got a seal on the new aluminium piece for the oil cooler. There's no elbow in here at the moment, but what there is, you've got the outer aluminium casting, then there's this brass bushing, then there's a little plastic insert, and you might not be able to see it on the camera, but deep down below that plastic insert there's a little black rubber O-ring. So the O-ring and seal are already in there for the elbow to just click into place, but that's not what we're going to do with it. So our new elbow kit comes with the O-ring and the sort of retaining clip. So we don't need the O-ring and retaining clips, so I'm going to put them to one side and save them. All I'm interested in is the brass elbow. This end has got the lip on it for the hose to clip on, and this end has got a very, very small fine groove, if you can just see, level with the tip of my fingernail there. So that small groove there is what's going to click into the plastic piece and retain it. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of lubricant to it, just because I don't want to distort the O-ring on fitting, and I want it to have enough stuff so that it'll move around freely. And hopefully we can listen and feel for a click. So that's in there all good. Next I need to pay attention to this piece, which has come with a version of the plastic elbow, which, as we've just been talking about, is the part that we don't actually really want. So I'm just going to hose clip this. So now we've got the open end ready to go onto the elbow, and we've got the other end ready to get onto the water pump. So that little assembly will go together something like that. I've left these two unclamped and loose for now so that I can get the water pump mounted, then get the thermostat located exactly where it wants to go with a bit of wiggle room. So this is obviously where it's going to live. I'm just going to spend a bit of time cleaning up the bottom locating point for the thermostat, that bottom hose as well, and you can maybe just see I filled this electrical plug with coolant as well, so that needs drying out before we put it all back together. Okay, so that's pretty much everything refitted. The only thing I haven't done yet is torqued the 4 bolts for the water pump correctly. They're nipped up and they're fully home, but they just need that torque setting on there. No real interesting points to note. Just make sure when you fit in the thermostat housing that you remember everything that you took off. So remember on the bottom plastic joint right at the bottom, there's like that little wire spring clip that clicks in and out. Once it's seated fully home on its O-ring, then there's the wiring clips, the wiring plug for the sensor down here as well. Haven't got much else to say on that. You may have noticed I had to swap these hose clamps around a little bit just because of the witness marks on the hose. Where that hose clamp originally went, the spiky end of it is under here somewhere. And I don't know why they've done that, but I reckon it's probably because something goes over the top here and the tabs would get in the way if they were on top, maybe. That's the only theory I've got on that. But yeah, that's it. Just try and put everything back that you've took off. Remember, leave it how you found it, really, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. So you may have noticed that I didn't use any grease on the water pump bolts. I didn't use any sealant on the gaskets either. The water pump comes with the steel crush gaskets mounted loosely to the back of the bolts anyway, and the original Jaguar item wasn't held on with any sealant at all. So if it's good enough for Jaguar to rely on just the steel crush gaskets, then that's what I'm going to rely on as well. I didn't use any copper grease because the bolts go into either the block or the cylinder heads. I think it's the block from what I can see. So the grease can affect the torque loading on the bolts. You'll get a better clamping force, but you are at risk of stretching them and snapping them a little bit. So it's one of them things. There's different opinions out there on it. I couldn't find a very good definite answer on the torque spec either. The internet recommended between 8 to 12 Newton meters. So I'm going to play it safe. I've got my torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters, middle of the road, and we'll try and get in there. Now I know it's generally bad practice to double torque something because you'll end up with it over torqued, but I really don't want this to leak, so I'm going to go and gently double check everything. So for the upper Y-pipe assembly, I did find a certain torque value, and that's 12 Newton meters. The other thing about this is the O-rings on this are kind of free to move a little bit in their grooves, and I don't want one to pinch and end up binding and getting caught and causing a leak. So again, just going to gently lubricate them to encourage them to slip into their seat first time, no problems. So the bolts for the upper Y-pipe, I actually have put copper grease on these, and it's a total change of my mind from what I've done with the water pump, I realise, but it's justified. The water pump is and was aluminium, and the bolts sit into the engine at such an angle where they're not likely to sit in water at any time. We know that the V of the engine has an issue with the bonnet vents getting water in and corroding things like the valve covers, maybe that bolt at the front, and then this sits further down into the V where rainwater could potentially pool again. Now that we've changed what was a plastic piece for an aluminium piece as well, we're more likely to see galvanic corrosion on the steel bolts, and they're more likely to snap in future. So for those reasons, I've put anti-seize on these, which will affect the torque value, but of course we're going to be careful and we're going to bear that in mind. Next up then, we're going to look at fitting the Serpentine belt tensioner back. These two mounting lugs ensure you can only fit it one way, and they actually fit either side above and below here, and this is the bolt hole for it. Tightening torque was quite hard to find. In fact, I didn't find it. So I went off a combination of generic torque charts and the knowledge that it's going into aluminium, and it's an M10 bolt. And that puts me somewhere between 40 and maybe 55 Newton meters. So I've gone up to 50 on this wrench, and we'll see if that feels good. Quite a fiddly job, because we want to get the belt sort of loosely in place where roughly it should be before we do this, because it'll make our lives a lot easier when it comes to refitting. Let's go with that. Then once you think you've got it in place, it's worth popping under the car just to have a little look, make sure it's all around the pulleys correctly. Because of those ribbed belts, they tend to like to sit slightly off to one side on at least one pulley if they can. So it's all looking pretty good. Now that the belt and tension is back in, I'm going to use a 24mm deep socket and a ratchet just to crank the engine over a couple of times via the crank pulley, just to make sure that that belt's running true and it's not snagging on anything. Well, that is tough. I mean, one thing's for sure, that has got a good compression on it. Next thing I'm going to look at then is removing this outer crank pulley. There's a little join at the back here, if you can see that, between these two crank pulleys. Obviously they're bolted up together to be the same. There's a large 24mm bolt directly in the centre, which I don't think holds the outer one on. I believe this outer one is only held on with 6 T50 fasteners. So T50 Torx bit and 6 bolts to remove from the centre of this crank pulley. that's the pulley out then. We just had to nip underneath there towards the end with just a tiny pry bar and just working around the pulley bit by bit. It comes off. Obviously that thick edge is what's mounted to the crank pulley. You've got your 6 bolt holes there, and there's, on this inner ring, there's a corresponding piece on the actual main crank pulley. If you can see that sort of rusty coloured metal lip there, that is like the boss on which this mounts. That's what we needed the puller for, just to get it, the pry bar, sorry, just to get it off that little lip. Interestingly, when you look at it, it's got a rubber isolator built into it, so it's actually in 2 pieces, the inner and outer, bonded together by this rubber seal or rubber weight. So that will be to take some of the vibrations out of the crank drive for the charger. Call them a torsional vibration damper, or sometimes a harmonic balancer, which I think are 2 slightly different principles, but broadly quite a similar device. So the new pulley, which will be a slightly larger diameter to drive the supercharger faster, probably won't come with one of those, which is a bit of a concern. These can sort of fail anyway on other cars, certainly. I've had it in the past where they crack all the way around eventually and the inner piece no longer spins with the outer piece. Just give you a view of the bolts then. So there's 6 of these, T50, and if you can see that, they have got thread lock on. They are very tight to get out, and they're tight all the way out as well. Not 100% sure if those are stretch bolts or not. I will look into it and find out. But yeah, that's the pulley out, and the aim of the game, of course, is to change that for an aftermarket one, bigger diameter, spin the supercharger faster and get more power. Well, that wraps it up for today's video. Thanks very much for watching. If you found it useful, please do subscribe, and if you've got any comments or questions, let me know down there and I'll get back to you. In the next video, we'll be probably looking at the supercharger overhaul, and we've still got the reassembly and refitment of everything to come, as well as a new crank pulley, but that's just a very quick job, hopefully. See you in the next video. Bye bye.